A suspect in Daniel Morecambe's disappearance committed suicide days after he was questioned by police. His inquest has heard at the time he vanished, a number of pedophiles were on the Sunshine Coast hunting for boys.
On the afternoon of the 7th of December 2003, a 13-year-old boy in a red billabong shirt stood at a bus stop under a highway overpass on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. He was going to buy Christmas presents for his family. The bus he was waiting for had broken down. A replacement came through and drove straight past him, and the driver pointed ahead to signal that another one was coming. That bus arrived 3 minutes later. By the time the bus arrived, the boy was gone. He was 12 days short of his 14th birthday. What followed became the largest police investigation in Queensland history, with a $1 million reward and 8 years that produced no body and no forensic link. His parents kept his face on the news for decades. The man who took him was questioned within days and let go. The gang that finally caught him did not exist back when he disappeared. This is how they finally cracked the case. Daniel James Morecambe was born on the 19th of December 1989. He grew up in Palmwoods, a small town in the hills behind the Sunshine Coast, with his parents Bruce and Denise, his twin brother Bradley, and his older brother Dean. The boys rode bikes and kept miniature horses. In the summer, they picked fruit on a neighbour's place for pocket money. That Sunday started with rain. The three brothers had planned to pick passion fruit that morning, and the weather pushed everything back. By the time they finished, Bruce and Denise were leaving for a Christmas party in Brisbane. The boys had just started school holidays and were happy to have the day to themselves. Daniel decided to go shopping. He wanted a haircut and Christmas presents for his family, and he had $150 in his wallet that he had earned picking fruit. He asked his brothers to come with him. Dean was riding to a friend's house. Daniel asked Bradley twice, and Bradley said no. He wanted to go the next day instead, on the Monday. Daniel had a shower and put on a bright red billabong t-shirt and a pair of shorts. Bradley was at the computer when his twin left the house. He heard Daniel say goodbye over his shoulder and didn't turn around to look at him. That was the last time anyone in the family saw him. The walk took about 20 minutes, a kilometre from the house to a bus stop on the Nambour Connection Road under the Keel Mountain Road overpass, about 2 kilometres north of the Big Pineapple. It was not an official stop. It was a request stop on a grass and dirt verge under a concrete bridge. The kind of place where a bus pulls over because someone waves at it. He was there for the 1:35 service. What he didn't know was that the 1:35 had broken down 750 metres short of the overpass. At 2:15, a replacement bus came through. The driver was a man named Ross Edmonds, and he was running behind because of the breakdown. With passengers on board who were already late, he was under instructions to keep moving. He saw the boy in the red shirt. It would have been hard not to. Edmonds later told the Supreme Court that Daniel lifted a finger to flag him down, and that he pointed ahead to signal that another bus was coming. Then he drove on and radioed the depot to send one. The next bus reached the underpass at 2:18. 3 minutes. In that window, on a Sunday afternoon, in daylight, beside a highway, a 13-year-old boy in a bright red shirt disappeared without a single person seeing what happened to him. Witnesses had seen him standing there. Some reported a man near him, possibly two, and several described a blue sedan. There was talk of a white van. There was no camera at the stop, no camera on that stretch of road, nothing but a bridge, a verge, and cane fields running off in both directions. Bruce and Denise got home from the party expecting to find their son. Denise later described the moment plainly. He wasn't home, and they started to panic. They rang around the friends and the neighbours, and nobody had seen him. That evening they called the police. The first official response treated Daniel as a possible teenage runaway. His parents said immediately that this was wrong. Daniel had no reason to run. He had Christmas money in his pocket and presents to buy. He was 12 days from his birthday. He was, by every account, a boy who came home. The classification stood anyway, because that was the policy at the time for a missing teenager. Once the search did begin, it became the largest police operation the state had ever run. More than 100 officers worked the case. More than 10,000 people were interviewed. Investigators combed bushland, dragged waterways, walked grid patterns through scrub with State Emergency Service volunteers, and knocked on every property along the Nambour Connection Road and the side roads feeding off it. The Crime and Misconduct Commission brought its coercive powers to bear, and 14 people were formally examined. Daniel's face went onto posters in every town in Queensland. Bruce and Denise stood in front of cameras again and again, asking anyone who knew anything to speak. Two ordinary parents from Palmwoods became the most recognisable faces in the country, and the only reason anyone knew their names was that their son was missing. Subscribe so you don't miss how an undercover operation finally got him to say it out loud. Investigators had a description to work with, and it pointed them somewhere specific. Several witnesses had reported a blue sedan near the overpass. That detail, more than any other, shaped the years that followed. It led them to a man named Douglas Jackway. He was a convicted sex offender who had been released from prison 1 month before Daniel disappeared. He drove a blue vehicle. His record was severe enough that a member of Parliament stood up and argued the courts had been shown clear evidence of his risk of re-offending before they let him out. For years, a substantial part of the investigation ran through him. The blue car had nothing to do with Daniel Morecambe. Neither did Jackway. The reward went up. The government offered $250,000, and private donations pushed the total to $1 million. In May 2009, police put a full-size clay model of the man witnesses had described at the overpass, standing at the roadside where Daniel had waited, to jog memories. More than 300 tips came in within days. Not one of them led anywhere. There was another name on the list. By the end of December 2003, police had identified 33 persons of interest, and one of them was a 34-year-old man who lived in Beerwah, about 20 kilometres from the overpass. He had 2 prior convictions for sexually assaulting children. Detectives went to see him within days of the disappearance because of exactly that. He denied everything. Then police did the arithmetic on his movements and worked out that he had a window of about half an hour. Half an hour didn't seem like enough time to abduct a child, drive him somewhere, and dispose of him. He was effectively set aside. Years later, at the coronial inquest, counsel assisting the coroner made a single observation about that reasoning. This man had abducted and raped boys within half an hour. He had done it twice. There were officers who didn't want to let it go. A detective named Dennis Martin interviewed him in 2003 and came away convinced. Martin testified at the inquest that he took it to the head of the homicide squad, Mike Condon, and was told, in his account, to get lost in blunter terms. Condon denied the conversation ever happened, and the coroner later found the claim couldn't be proven either way. Martin's partner, Kenneth King, told the inquest he had also considered the man a key suspect. Given the record and a 45-minute gap in his alibi, and that the response team didn't pursue it. In July 2005, a detective sat down with him on the Gold Coast and asked him directly whether he would ever admit to being involved in Daniel's disappearance. He said, probably not. While the file sat, 2 lives ran side by side about 20 kilometres apart. In 2004, the first full year without their son, the Morecambes were still living in the same house in Palmwoods, with Daniel's room in it. In the same year, the man in Beerwah was divorced by his wife. In May 2005, the Morecambes founded the Daniel Morecambe Foundation. While their son's case sat unsolved, they built a child safety organisation out of it, teaching children to recognise when something is wrong, to react, and to tell an adult they trust. In 2007, the case had not moved in 4 years. That same year, 20 kilometres away, he sat for a psychological assessment and said something that went into a report and stayed there. He said he always worried that if things got bad, he could offend again. In 2009, Bruce and Denise went public with a call for a coronial inquest. The investigation had run out of places to go, and they wanted the evidence tested in the open. By then, the man in Beerwah had legally changed his name. He had taken his dog's name and combined it with a piece of slang that meant none of your business. And once a year, on a date the family chose, more and more Australians put on a red shirt for a boy they had never met. The inquest the Morecambes asked for opened in October 2010 and ran until April 2011. The bus driver testified. Witnesses testified. Persons of interest were called to the stand and questioned under oath, which was something no investigation had been able to do to them before. The man from Beerwah gave his account of that Sunday. He said he had driven along that road to buy marijuana from a dealer, and that he had also been collecting a mulcher. It was the same story he had given detectives in 2003. Police checked it. His cannabis dealers were not home during the window when Daniel went missing. They couldn't recall him visiting them at all that afternoon. The alibi collapsed in public. It had taken 7 years and a coronial inquest that the victim's parents had to campaign for to get that alibi properly tested. The dealers had been findable the whole time. It still wasn't enough. A collapsed alibi and a criminal record aren't evidence of murder. And every officer in that room knew it. Nothing physical had ever tied this man to Daniel, and nothing about the inquest changed that. What they needed was for him to say it himself. The inquest did something else that nobody in the room could see. Police used it as a doorway. The proceedings gave them a reason to put a man in a room with him, and that man was an undercover officer. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened in that Perth hotel room. What happened next was borrowed. The technique is known in policing as Mr. Big, and it came out of Canada, where the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have run it in more than 350 cases. The method is simple to describe and enormously difficult to do. Undercover officers invent a crime syndicate and staff it with themselves. They meet the suspect by apparent accident. They offer him work, and the work is staged, and the money is real. They pay him for small jobs and then bigger ones. Over months they make him feel wanted, useful, and protected until he believes he has finally found a place where he belongs. Then the organisation asks him for the truth. In April 2011, an undercover officer took the seat next to him on a flight to Perth and struck up a conversation. He was friendly, he was well connected, and he seemed to like the man he was sitting beside. Over the months that followed, a team of officers drew him further in. They ran staged deals. They handed him cash. The operation spanned the entire country and has been described as the most elaborate undercover job Australian police had ever attempted. He believed all of it. On the 9th of August 2011, in a hotel room in Perth, he was taken in to meet the boss. The boss told him the organisation had a problem. Police were sniffing around the Morecambe case, and the crew could make evidence go away and make problems disappear, but only if they knew exactly what they were dealing with. If he held anything back, he was going to be dropped like a hot potato. He said, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I did it." Then he described it. He had parked his car in the car park of the Christian Outreach Centre, a church he had attended, and walked down to the bus stop. He offered the boy a lift to the shopping centre. Daniel got into the car. He drove him to an isolated property, and when Daniel resisted him, he put his hands around the boy's throat. He said he went back to the site afterwards and moved what was left. Every second of it was recorded on hidden camera. 4 days later, on the 13th of August 2011, he drove undercover officers out to bushland at the end of Kings Road in the Glasshouse Mountains to show them where he had put the body. Police were already there. Detective Sergeant Graham Farlow told the court he had hidden himself behind a pile of timber and waited. They arrested him at the site. Brett Peter Cowan. He was 41 years old, born in Bunbury, Western Australia in September 1969, the third of 4 sons in a strict household. His father was an army major and a Vietnam veteran who carried PTSD and was often away. Cowan dropped out of school in year 10, drifted through jobs he never held for long, and had his first conviction at 17. On the 5th of December 1987, at 18, he was doing community service at a park in Brisbane. He took a 7-year-old boy into a toilet cubicle and sexually assaulted him. Afterwards, he walked over to the childcare centre where he was doing maintenance work, sat down and watched television. He was sentenced to 2 years. He served 1. In September 1993, he was living at a caravan park in Darwin. He lured a 6-year-old boy into an abandoned car yard and assaulted him. The child was left in a wrecked car with a punctured lung and deep cuts to his body. The boy got himself to a petrol station. Police who saw his injuries assumed he had been hit by a car. When detectives canvassed the caravan park, every man living there volunteered a DNA sample. Every man except Cowan. Semen had been found on the boy's discarded underwear, and when officers came back holding it, he confessed. He was charged with grievous harm, deprivation of liberty, and gross indecency. The more serious charges, including attempted murder, were dropped before trial. He was sentenced to 7 years. He served 3.5. 2 years for the 7-year-old, 1 year served. 7 years for the 6-year-old, 3.5 served. Attempted never reached a jury at all. The psychologist who assessed him after Darwin described a pathological liar with low-level psychopathic features living a parasitic existence off his parents. The report recorded that Cowan believed his victim would not report the assault because the boy had probably enjoyed it. He was released in 1997 and moved to the Sunshine Coast to live with an aunt and uncle who were pastors. He started attending church. In 1998, he moved to Beerwah. In 1999, he married a woman from his congregation and had children with her. He had walked out of prison in 1989 after serving a year for what he did to a 7-year-old boy. Daniel Morecambe was born that December. The site Cowan took police to was an abandoned sand mine beside a macadamia farm at the end of Kings Road, about 40 kilometres south of the bus stop. On the 21st of August 2011, searchers found 2 shoes and 3 human bones. The shoes matched what Daniel had been wearing. Teams worked that ground from August through to December. They recovered 17 bones, a rib, a hip, a leg, an arm, vertebrae. With them came underpants, a belt, and fragments of clothing. Most of the bones were lying 10 to 15 centimetres below the surface, which told investigators the body had never been buried. It had been left on the ground and covered over, and the bush had taken 8 years to work it down that far. That is what the science had to work with. Not a grave, not a sealed scene. Skeletal fragments that had been exposed to Queensland weather, water, and animals for 8 summers. A forensic scientist named Catherine McGovern gave evidence to the court by video link from New Zealand. From a single upper arm bone, the lab had recovered a partial DNA profile. It was matched against DNA lifted from Daniel's toothbrush, still in his family's house. That partial profile off one arm bone is what formally gave Daniel Morecambe his name back. Cowan's white Mitsubishi Pajero was examined. There was no DNA in it, no blood, no fibre, nothing. Daniel's distinctive fob watch, a pocket watch engraved with the word Dan, was never recovered and has never been found. On the 7th of December 2012, 9 years to the day since he had walked to that bus stop, more than 2,000 people came to Siena Catholic College for Daniel's funeral. The family asked everyone to wear red. Bruce and Denise placed a still-wrapped Christmas present from 2003 on their son's coffin, along with a report card and a school photograph he never got to see. The trial opened on the 10th of February 2014 in the Supreme Court of Queensland before Justice Roslyn Atkinson. Prosecutors called 116 witnesses and put more than 200 exhibits in front of the jury over about 5 weeks. At the centre of the case was the video from the Perth hotel room, along with audio recorded as Cowan walked officers through the bush and pointed out where he had left the body. Cowan pleaded not guilty. His defence argued the confession was a lie he had told to please a criminal gang that was waving money at him, and that the whole operation had been coercive. He didn't give evidence himself. On the 13th of March 2014, after about 7.5 hours, the jury convicted him of indecent treatment of a child under 16 and interfering with a corpse. Atkinson sentenced him to life with parole eligibility after 20 years. She told him he didn't look like a monster and didn't look like a paedophile. He looked like an ordinary man, and that, she said, was exactly what made him dangerous. She called him a convincing and adaptable liar and said she didn't think he should be released in 20 years' time. Cowan showed no remorse. Bradley Morecambe stood up and spoke about the last time he saw his brother, and about being asked to come along, and about saying no. Cowan appealed in 2015, arguing the confession should never have been admitted. The Queensland Court of Appeal dismissed it. An appeal to increase his minimum term was also dismissed. The High Court later refused to hear him. He is eligible for parole in August 2031. In April 2019, State Coroner Terry Ryan handed down his findings. He accepted Daniel was likely killed within an hour of being taken, which meant no police response could have saved him. He found the runaway classification was within the guidelines of the day and noted those guidelines have since been rewritten, in large part because of this case, and he found that more could have been done to focus on Cowan early, given his admissions placing him at the scene, the gaps in his alibi, and the specific nature of his offending history. On the physical items that might have linked Cowan to Daniel, the coroner was direct. Those items, he said, should have been prioritised and the subject of much earlier examination. They sat unexamined for 8 years. Ryan recommended that Queensland change the way it runs these cases. A missing person investigation with a suspected death behind it should get an automatic formal review rather than running on for years on the judgment of whoever happens to be holding the file. There's one thing the record still doesn't hold. Cowan never explained why. The only account he ever gave was the one he offered to a room he believed was full of criminals, and it described what he did without ever touching the question of why he did it. The courts established who took Daniel Morecambe. Why has never been answered by the only person alive who could answer it. Daniel Morecambe put on a red billabong shirt on a Sunday morning in December 2003. He asked his brother to come with him, then walked down to a bus stop to buy Christmas presents for the people he loved. On the last Friday in every October, millions of Australian children wear red for him. In one recent year, 1.2 million school children took part. His parents built that out of the worst thing that can happen to a family, and they kept building. On the 31st of December 2025, Daniel's law came into force in Queensland, creating the state's first public register of child sex offenders. It passed Parliament 22 years after he disappeared, and it carries his name because his mother and father spent those 22 years making sure it would. 3 minutes between one bus and the next. That is all it took. If this case stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments. More solved cases in the playlist.